Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the awesome Q95 from GearBest. Features an F3 flight controller, a 10 amp 4-in-1 ESC, 1103 7500 kV awesome motors, 2-inch gem fan props, 40 channel 600 TV line all-in-one camera and VTX. Mine came with a FlySky receiver, 2 LEDs and a buzzer, JST. It comes with 2 sets of props, a set of prop guards, camera instructions, a nice foam box, and no prop screws. It weighs 51.6 grams. Bottom plate's 2 millimeters. Camera prod is 1 millimeter. You've got approximately 14 millimeters of ground clearance. You can fly it with 2 or 3S batteries. So let me start off with a few tips and warnings before we get too deep into this. One, the FlySky version, which is the one that I have with the receiver, the failsafe does not work. So be careful, and that's one of the many reasons you see that my antenna is mounted nice and proud. So do some testing at your flying field and don't get too far away from yourself unless you've tested that range. Otherwise, it will just keep going. The LED and buzzer on mine was pretty much loose. It would just wobble around, and you can see I have put some hot glue on there. You can also see I got it on crooked. But no worries, it stays out of the props. Our wires should go underneath that. You can see those little notches. And I think I would improve mine just a bit more by taking a small zip tie and putting it right down here, giving it a little pigtail to make sure that those wires stay down out of the props. The landing legs worked out fine. Even with the landing legs, many of my flights I landed on the battery still. So I can't tell you if these landing legs are going to make it very far if you have a different experience with as far as your battery goes. And part of the reason is I use Duralock on the bottom, so my battery is actually extended down probably 2 to 3 millimeters farther than yours will. And then we've got another probably 1.5 millimeters for our rubber band that goes around the bottom. So I found that it would sit stable but if I didn't come down exactly flat, it's probably hitting the battery at least a little bit. This is an almost ready to fly, and you have to connect the receiver, but it's not that big a deal. As you can see here, oh, my camera's loose, by the way. We'll cover that in just a second. This is our pinout. So we've got our signal, our 5-volt, and our ground. And then down over here, we've got those to match. So we've got our signal, 5-volt, and ground. So that's if you're running PPM or S-bus. And then DSM is on the other side. Whereas you still have the ground on the inside row, on the outside, or the top. And then you have your signal at the bottom. And then your 3.3 volt for your satellite receiver down there, right behind this red wire, back in there. It's not that big a deal. Most of us, I would hope, have a soldering iron, and just go slow, be careful, you'll be fine. One of the things that I found, another warning back to those, is that, and you'll get to see it because I had a crash, and I'm going to show you that one, even though the flight footage is not great. It's kind of a first for me, but I wanted a little bit more camera angle, and if you can see from this piece here, it's angled up ever so slightly. And you could just take a piece of foam tape and secure your camera straight down if that's the angle that you want. It's curious that we have these little notches in here. Kind of feels like they had a different idea originally. So maybe we'll see yet another iteration on this. But I want a little bit more camera angle. I had mine up about here. And of course now it's loose, so I'll need to redo that. Like I said, the intro 2 and 3S, we'll do some punch-out tests with those real quick so you get a view. But I was pleasantly surprised. With the default PIDs, it flies pretty well. Could it use a little bit of tuning? Yeah, probably. But I switched from 2 to 3S, and in the flight footage that you have either seen some of or you will see more of, I didn't switch the PIDs at all. I didn't change anything. I just slapped on a 3S battery and did a little quick line of sight hover and a punch. It looked fine, so I just flew it. And that's kind of rare that you find the default PIDs and they work on 2 and 3S or multiple cell batteries. Normally what you find is that you get heavy micro oscillations and the thing just skyrockets to the moon until you disarm and then it falls back to the earth. Oh, let me go back to one other thing that I want to cover. It's going to be really hard for me to show this. But this flight controller, boy, I don't know if I can even get this in camera. Right down in there, hopefully you can see all the little solder lines in there. That's an OSD chip. This has an OSD, but the camera is just a 2-wire camera. So you could possibly hack this camera up to connect it to the OSD, and you could get the OSD features. I think that's a little bit of a miss because this thing flies really well, and it's a nice little 2-incher. The weight is good. The way they have the motor layout, they have the position of the flight controller, the way they have things designed here, this is one of the few vehicles that you'll find that's almost ready to fly. All you have to add is the receiver that fly pretty well on the Betaflight PIDs. It's not very often you find that. Usually you have to tune these a fair bit. I like that they included some good props, but I'm really worried about a lot of people getting this and not having screws for their props. I pulled some 6mm ones out and they don't work. I typically have been finding that 7mm screws work, and I bought a couple of baggies off of eBay. I think they're like $4 for 50. So I bought 2 baggies of 7mm screws, and that's what I'm using in here. So if you are ordering this and you want to fly it, you'll need some of those. The props do slide on kind of stiff, so you might be able to fly it a little bit, but I wouldn't risk it. Because if you do anything hard or aggressive, you have a prop fly off, and next thing you know, you're crashing to the ground, and you didn't even have the joy of doing it yourself. It was just a mechanical failure. The camera, I think I missed that originally when I was talking. I got sidetracked. The camera is just kind of sandwiched in here, and it doesn't really fit. So you are going to need to do something with the camera, either some foam tape on this bottom piece here, or you're going to need to use some glue like I did here. Just be aware that this piece in here, as you can see, it wobbles around a little bit, so don't rely just on foam tape down here. You'll probably want to do something else, whether it's a rubber band or something, because as you get to flying, you'll get the jello if you don't secure the camera down, which is how I noticed my camera was broken after the last crash. It's a little bit fussy getting these things apart. To get your receiver up here, you will have to disassemble this top piece, so you have to take out these 4 screws, and these side pieces slide. As you can see there's a couple of slots. So this middle piece slides through the side piece. The screw isn't even down all the way. Fixed. So it's a little bit fussy working that. And I just used a zip tie here cut it off, use a little bit of heat shrink, because I did want, because that failsafe doesn't work, I did want to make sure this was nice and proud up here. The LEDs blink and flash, and it gives you various information, I suppose. I think it gives you a binding state and whether you're armed or not. I was really impressed with these motors. I really felt like this flew like a much larger vehicle, and I was really happy with it. I think the camera's got good protection, not great, just good. Unless you get the camera angle pretty severe, you're going to be, well, you're going to be exposed. Either the lens is going to be exposed a little bit, or your PCB up here is going to be exposed, where you could have an impact that breaks the grounding on the antenna. But overall, I think it's a good quad. They did a nice job assembling it. Lucky enough for us that you really don't have to do too much PID tuning. If you don't want to tune at all, the PIDs that are on Betaflight default are going to work just fine for you. If you want to tune a little bit, you won't have to change the values very dramatically, so you'll be able to get a good flight experience without having to be some sort of expert PID tuner. And I'm not an expert PID tuner. That's not a put down in any way. It's just that PID tuning can be a challenge sometimes depending upon the vehicle. But in this case, the defaults work pretty darn well. There are some solder joints down here I'm not crazy about. You see how they're kind of gray and not silver? That's actually kind of typical. I don't oftentimes bring it up because we find it on most of these ready-to-fly vehicles. It's a combination of not being hot enough and maybe the solder that they're using, so we can't really control that. I haven't had any problems with mine coming apart or anything, so I think that will be fine. I do find the rubber bands to be a bit fussy, especially when you're squeezing a fat old 3S battery in under here. It's almost a two-handed operation, but you just don't have enough room for two hands. My preference would be if they find a battery strap that's nice and short, that we have that instead. And I'm not a fan of battery straps that don't have a buckle on them. So even if they gave me a battery strap, I might still voice my discontent with the style of battery strap. So I'm a little bit picky in that regards. And mainly that's because these rubber bands are eventually going to dry out and they're going to break, and you are going to have to get new ones, or you're going to have to get a battery strap through there. So you have to pick your poison on that eventually. I like to use the Duralock for two reasons. One, it helps secure the battery. Usually when I have Duralock and any other sort of strap, I don't have batteries ejecting. And that's one of the reasons why. You can buy this from findtapes.com, and you can get like 10 meters for $10 or something like that. It's actually pretty cheap. I've been pretty happy with it. You can see mine's getting a little bit folded over from the number of presses. I've had about 25 flights on it, but had a good time. I like this quad. I think if you're interested in micros and you maybe have a fleet of your own, you're looking to add one, it's a pretty good one. You can't go wrong with it. A little bit of PID tuning, you make it your own. I do wish they had that camera that would connect up the OSD, because I like OSDs. A little bit of extra information when you're flying can't hurt you, right? But overall, I'm pretty happy. Didn't have any brownouts. If you want some extra power or extra juice, you can disassemble. You can upgrade the wire. This isn't very thick wire. I think this is probably 20 gauge wire. You could drop down to 18. You could put an XT30 on there and see how much more juice you can get through it, especially if you're interested in flying 3S. 3S in my space is a little bit more challenging. I find doing those hard 180s with something this light that I end up ballooning up out of the air, and so I have to kind of stay off the throttle and wait for it to come down before I can get under the branches and onto the next thing. And you'll see that in the flight footage. I think it flies pretty well with 2S, and in the flying space that I typically use, my backyard, I'll continue to operate this on 2S. Let's take a quick walkthrough of what the Betaflight setup is. Taking a look at Betaflight here as we connect up. We're just going to do a quick overview, and I'll highlight a couple things. This is actually a pre-recording. I'm just narrating, and as you can see, I switched things to D-Shot because it has that ability. And I didn't really change a whole lot. You can see the gyros running 8K and 2K. We do have a black box enabled, but there is no data chip, so there's no point in having that on there. There is no OSD card, so you could simply turn that off. And the OSD isn't connected, so you could turn that off as well. And this is where we put in the name. And now we're taking a look at the PIDs. These are stock PIDs, I believe. If they're not stock, whatever they put on there works great. Nothing to see here with our receiver. This is how I set up my modes. I use a switch to arm. I use a 3-position switch to do air mode and angle mode, and then just at rate. This is a 6-channel receiver, so you don't have a beeper enabled. There's our motors tab, but nothing really to see. This is how I typically lay out my Betaflight OSD. You can see the position on the screens. You can drag these things around to place them where you want to on your goggles or screen, and you just simply drag them around. This is the LED strip. It does have a few colors programmed in there. check out the CLI, and we're just going to do a status and a version here so you get a good look at what we've got going on. Alright, let's jump into some more flight footage. If you have any comments or questions, please leave those in the section down below, and thank you for watching.
Alright, gonna do a little punch. This is 2S. This is 3S. One more time, 2S. This is 3S.
If you've made it this far in the video, you deserve to know that I don't bring this flight footage as part of a review for the vehicle, but rather to share the reality of a first for me. The basics of our flying is that we're going to crash, and I mention that all the time in my videos. I don't want anyone to think that I don't crash. I crash more times than I finish a full battery and land, and in this particular case, I have finally stuck a quad in the trees. I am flying 3S in this particular video, and you'll also notice that the PIDs do need a little bit of tweaking, but as I said, the defaults do work. You will be able to fly with the defaults. It just isn't really finely tuned. Ah!